Dale Pinkert here at TradeGateHub.com, sponsored by TradeView Markets, and we're privileged to have Alasdair with us today. We're going to be discussing what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine war and what Putin's aims are. He's written a great piece on it. Alasdair, welcome to our community. Appreciate your time today. Thank you for being with us.
Very much my pleasure, Dale.
Okay, so I know that your website, I'm showing it right here, is called Gold Money. So perhaps we could talk about what people call the archaic relic that hurts when you drop it on your foot. And, you know, a lot of people, I remember, says it was only good for a paperweight, and, you know, that crypto is so much more portable. So how did you end up in this field? Did you always have an interest in economics when you were younger? Tell us a little bit about, you know, your journey and how you ended up having a passion for what you're writing about nowadays.
Well, I've always had an interest in economics, certainly. And I've also always had an interest in politics because my father was a minister in the Kenya government going way back in 1962-3.
Did you say Kenya?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay, all right.
We used to call it Kenya. They call it Kenya now.
Okay, all right. So you guys, he immigrated from where to Kenya?
Well, it was post-war because my parents met during the war, believe it or not, in Mogadishu in Somaliland. So
yeah. Wow.
My father was area intelligence officer for the North Indian Ocean, as it were, that bit of East Africa. And my uncle, his elder brother, was also a politician, but in Britain. And he ended up as Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1970.
Wow.
But he wasn't all that well physically. And he actually died in office after about 6 months, which was a great pity.
Yeah.
And so
it's genetic. It's in your DNA.
I think, yeah. I mean, I'm not quite sure that it's genetic, but you know, when you're a child or when you're young, you know, these things shape you a bit, don't they? So that's what shaped me, I think. And then I went into stockbroking, and that was in 1970.
Okay.
And you know, again, I mean, it was fascinating watching the mistakes that the government were making in the gilt market. I mean, it was just unreal. And you know, everybody in the stock market in those days knew the mistakes they were making. I mean, it was so damned obvious. But the reason it was obvious to us was nobody in the stock market in those days had a university degree. It was the university degrees that changed everything, and they were brought in by the bankers after Big Bang, when banks acquired stockbroking businesses. Okay. And that sort of changed the whole character of analysis and understanding of you know, bond markets and so on and so forth. So it's a fascinating, that is, if you like, a fascinating change, and that's still with us today. Things are being driven, if you like, by the sort of intellectual economics spouted by the Keynesians and the monetarists, right, and so on and so forth, rather than, you know, the dealers, if you like, with no real education, but experience, and knew how to make money. So it's right. The whole thing has actually changed hugely. And, you know, this is the legacy we have today. Okay. So that was how I started. That was my background. And here I am.
All right. Well, great to have you, and you really reveal a very interesting perspective on what's happening in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I'm going to put your recent research piece up on the board here, because the title is The World is Splitting in Two. And, you know, I guess laymen could see that, you know, NATO against Russia and China, you know, kind of how the world is being divided. But your perspective is even deeper than that. And maybe you could talk about Halford Mackinder's predictive analysis, who you label as the father of geopolitics, and that Putin is following it. Do you think that he, I know from seeing some interviews with Henry Kissinger, he was a voracious reader and, a very smart guy, and really looked for, he's really the fox in the world that actually has a strategy. You could probably say that about G. I don't know if you could say that about Western democracies right now. They seem to be flailing around. So do you believe that Putin read his works and this was his roadmap for what he's actually accomplishing, even though he's stalled on the military on the military field and wasn't able to just run through Ukraine and take Kiev in 6 hours or 6 days, that he's still winning the war?
Well, as to whether he read Mackinder, we really don't know. But he's certainly running a parallel course to that predicted by Mackinder. And we're talking about a paper which was originally written in about 1903, 1905, something like that. Yes, so you're running down to 1904. Thank you. And
okay,
his pivot of history is actually exactly what Putin is playing towards. And Russia has got the lion's share of global resources. That was a point which Mackinder was less emphasizing. What he was emphasizing was that it was an area which couldn't be invaded, if you like, by the sea, by navies and so on and so forth. But it was a huge, great land area, which, was beginning to open up to railways. I mean, he was particularly referring to the Trans-Siberian Railway to Vladivostok. And of course, today, with China's Silk Roads, the rail network has really extended and been hugely modernized. So, all those sort of predictions, if you like, that Mackinder was making are really coming true, in the sense that this is the pivot area for the world. It is the largest single area, the largest resourced area, and the communications in it are being improved. I mean,
and the largest populated area as well.
No, it's not the most populated area. I mean, Russia is not terribly populated from memory.
But the pivot area.
Oh, the pivot area, yes. If you include, well, not really. I mean, if you include China, which is sort of on the periphery of the original pivot area, yes. But we need to extend it from Mackinder's original thought into really the whole of the Asian continent, excluding some of the peripheries, like the independent nations on the Southeast Asian seaboard, and also Western Europe, which is very much in the NATO camp, but the rest of it. And if you take into account the other countries which are dependent on it, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, particularly some of the countries in Latin America. I mean, for example, the BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. I mean, we're talking about the influence of that Asian mass really going around the world. And consequently, the thing that people just haven't woken up to is, we think that, sort of Western democracy rules the world. Well, it does in one sense, insofar as the American dollar is the reserve currency, and it's a currency which everybody uses to price everything in internationally. But actually, if you look at the relative populations, as to your point, we're only 20% of the world population, roughly. I mean, I'm talking about NATO plus Japan,
so you're talking about the outer. This is what is he labeled the outer or insular crescent, the outer circle.
Yeah, but only part of that, because quite a lot of that outer circle is directly under the influence of the pivot area. So we're looking at about, I mean, our camp is roughly 20% of the world's population. Their camp is something, I think I calculated it out to be about 57% of the global population. So in other words, there are more than twice as many people in that, if you like, in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and associated trade partners, which really is what the pivot area is now. They're more than twice our size. And it's important. I mean, we're not talking about just a bunch of nomads riding horses in the middle of the steppes. We're actually talking about people who are rapidly industrializing. And
Right.
I think that's the point which we've really got to come to terms with in the geopolitical sense. And it's that which particularly informs Putin's strategy.
Okay, so you bring up the reserve currency, the dollar, and we know that one of the aims of not just Russia, but China as well, is to unseat the dollar and take away that leverage and advantage that the U.S. has with the dollar being the reserve currency. You know, they've been talking about it ending for at least, you know, throughout my trading career, and I'm not 30 anymore. So is it with what we saw with these sanctions being so draconian that other nations look at how all their assets could be frozen overnight? Is that going to be the catalyst that speeds up the dollar being dethroned? And what would happen? You know, what's the next step for them?
Okay, well, let's wind back a little bit. What China and Russia particularly want is to be able to do without the dollar, particularly for their internal affairs. That's the important thing. And also for those who trade closely with them. I mean, for example, Angola, as I understand it, sells oil to China, payable in Chinese yuan. So, you know, this is the sort of thing which China would rather build on than use the dollar. And you have to understand that under the correspondent banking system, if you do a dollar transaction, say in Mongolia, then this is reflected in a bank account in New York. So the intelligence information as to what is going on around the world in terms of transactions all goes back to America. And therefore, you can understand that from that point of view, the pivot area is not going to be really keen to see that sort of information being handed on a plate to the Americans. So that's I think the background to the dollar situation. I think the real problem for us is not so much that they are doing away with the dollar. I mean, the immediate problem, because they can't do away with the dollar in terms of pricing international commodities and so on and so forth. That is, you know, the only way that that's going to disappear is for the dollar to destroy itself. It's not going to come from anything out of China's or Russia's policies.
Well, we've been trying.
We have been trying.
Yes.
I mean, not intentionally, but you know, that's the way it is.
Self-inflicted wounds.
Self-inflicted, you know. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the phrase I was looking for. I think what's more important is the oil situation. Oil is fundamental. Oil, energy, gas, oil, gas, coal. These are fundamental. These are the commodities upon which we have built our economies, and upon which the pivot area, Asia as a whole, is now building its economies in this new industrial revolution. Now, what we have done is we have been, you know, we've sold our souls, if you like, on the idea of global warming, global climate change, and it's all
globalization, period.
Fuels. Yeah, so we're doing away with it. Now, what message does this send to the Saudis, for example? It tells them quite clearly that their future is not with us, because we're going to do without their valued oil. It's going to be with Asia. And Putin has doubled down on this simply by saying to us that if you want Siberian gas, then you're going to have to pay in rubles. Meanwhile, he's offering gas, oil, coal to everyone on his side, if I can put it that way, pivot area and extension.
Discounting it.
Yeah, well, not only at discounted prices, but he will accept their currencies in payment. He will even accept Turkish lira from Turkey. This is a very important point.
The weakest currency in the world.
Yeah, well, it's one of the weakest. I mean, look at the Iranian as well. That's another one. I mean, what he does with these currencies, I don't know. I mean, he probably just writes them off. But the point is that we have accelerated the development of Greater Asia under the control of Putin and Xi, and I think it's increasingly under Putin as the master strategist today, we have increased their power because basically they're subsidizing the energy requirements of everybody on their side. And what are we doing? You know, we're just killing ourselves. I mean, this winter is going to be quite terrible. It's not just Germany. I mean, you know, that hits the headlines. I mean, I saw next day electricity prices for the UK the other day, and it was the highest in all Europe. Yes. This is quite something.
Yeah, and you know, X times, not just a 50% increase. We're talking about tripling, quadrupling of utility bills for Europeans. And as an aside, you brought up Saudi Arabia. California actually is passing a law that will forbid the use and manufacturing of gas burning cars by 2035.
Yep.
And you know, that's, you know, if they could do it anywhere, they could do it here in California, a state where you need a license to get a license. And you know, other states will probably adopt that. So yeah, definitely you know, makes oil producers feel insecure about their future. But we certainly discounted Russia by calling the country nothing but a gas station, because it's also a palladium station. It's also a grain station. It's an everything station for the everything shortage that we have going on in the world right now, isn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, not only that, but interestingly, you know, putting my gold money hat on, as it were, or sound money hat on, China and Russia are almost level pegging in terms of producing gold, and they are the two largest gold miners in the world. And currently, their combined output is very nearly 700 tons. You know, this is quite something. And not only that, but they accumulate unknown reserves of rare earths, gold, silver, whatever. So they're actually pretty well endowed. I mean, it is the best single source of diverse commodity and energy, and we're just cutting ourselves off for them. I mean, if I can just move on a little bit from this.
Sure.
I think it's important to understand what Putin is actually trying to achieve in Europe and with the Ukrainian situation.
Okay.
What he is doing is he wants to drive American influence out of Europe. Why? Because America has been responsible for moving missile weapons and all the rest of it, capable of delivering missiles right into the heart of Russia. And he wants that to be moved back. He doesn't want to see NATO with that amount of American influence on his Western borders. So what does he do? Well, he has a crack at Ukraine. What is his objective there? It is quite simply not to get the whole of Ukraine. I mean, I think if, let's say, he'd had a 6-day war and just managed to walk through the whole thing, he wouldn't have stopped. But I don't think that was his real objective. His real objective was to maybe consolidate particularly the Russian-speaking side of Ukrainian territory, which are the eastern territories in the main. Right. Secure the Crimean Peninsula, which is a commanding position in the northern end of the Black Sea, which is important, obviously. But more importantly, he wants to squeeze Europe into chucking America out of Europe, if I can put it that bluntly.
Okay. Do you think this winter, when he cuts them off and people are burning their chairs and dining room tables to stay warm, and aren't there some periphery European countries that are already talking with Putin about energy supplies?
Well, there are not, I mean, outside the European Union, and obviously they're back channels.
Like Hungary's not in NATO, but he's going to negotiate for energy.
Absolutely. Okay. Orban is. And also, don't forget that France is very keen to appear to be, if you like, a negotiator to try and get people together. I mean, Macron he's up there, sort of dancing around, trying to appear like a statesman. And Putin's watching this and said, "Oh yeah, happy to talk," and all the rest of it. But I mean, from Putin's point of view, he has seen America driven out of various theaters of war on the Asian continent. He has seen Britain leave the European Union.
Yeah, you said Brexit was a big signal for him.
Absolutely. I mean, we are Americans' handmaid in this. Let's make no mistake about it. And so, we have effectively gone out of Brussels. And so you can see that from a timing point of view, he probably felt that this was right, particularly since Donald Trump, who was completely unpredictable in foreign, in foreign relations terms, is now replaced by Biden, who has been in the foreign relations business for a long time. And as we are now seeing, is actually a very, very weak hand. So, what better time to have a crack at it? And I think that's what we've ended up with. The squeeze that Russia is going to put on Europe is going to be, I mean, it's only just started, and I think it is going to be extremely uncomfortable through the winter months. And frankly, I really do think there's going to be genuine starvation in parts of the EU this winter. It's not going to be good. And the answer is, I mean, as far as Putin is concerned, he's not going to talk to anyone until he gets, if you like, a sort of a meaningful signal that the European Union are moving away from American control and more into a more pragmatic Western end of the Asian continent type approach. That's what he's seeking, and I think he will probably get it.
Okay, that's interesting. You're saying that here in your research, and a lot of people feel they're in lockstep, China and Russia, but you're saying that China, because of their interdependence on trade and being so wired into the global economy, is Putin's only wild card. How could China upset his scenario?
Well, yes. I mean, there are two things that we look at with China. I think one is its domestic property market, which has basic. It's overheated, and I understand the Chinese.
It makes the U.S. Housing crisis look like
conservative.
A picnic. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
It is. I mean, it is. It's being driven by inflation, just the same as house prices everywhere. And by inflation, I mean monetary inflation, the inflation of credit, if you like. It's just got ahead of itself. I mean, it's not a situation where it's the end of the housing boom. No. Basically, if you like, the population in China is getting increasingly wealthy. You're getting more and more people entering the middle classes, if you like, beginning to be more consumption driven than savings driven, though there is always this very high element of savings in the Chinese economy.
Haven't their savings been really taking a major hit? Because one of the vehicles that they invested in were ghost cities or other residential real estate that's taken a 70% haircut.
Yes, it's certainly been hit very hard. I would concur with that. But I don't think that hit is going to change Chinese citizens' behavior that much. I think they'll continue to save. The savings in property have died down a bit because the way in which property is sold in China, as I understand it, is that the developers will sell property before it is built, and it's paid up front, covered by mortgages. And what is happening is that the population, they're beginning to stop paying the mortgages because of the number of developers who have been going bust or who are defaulting on their loans. And obviously, if you've bought a property and it's yet to be delivered to you and you've paid in advance, then understandably you think, am I really going to continue to pay the mortgage on this property which I have bought, which is not being delivered to me? This is the situation they find themselves in. But moving on from that, of course, the other problem and this is slightly more complex, is China's reliance on exports, its export markets. Now, I mean, the export market is driven not so much by China itself, but it's more driven by the deficits that we have in the West. I mean, if you look, just looking at the American situation, broadly, unless there is a change in the savings habits of the ordinary American, then what you will have, just as a matter of national accounting identities, you will have a trade deficit which broadly matches the budget deficit. Because what the budget deficit does is it creates the money which can be spent on imports.
Goods.
And and this is really an American problem, but it does mean that a substantial part of China's economy is dependent, if you like, on exports to countries such as America. Now, having said that, I would expect the budget deficit after a small recovery from fiscal 21 to actually start sliding again in fiscal 23. We're just about to start fiscal 23. Why? Because America is going into recession. I've written about this today, so anyone who wants to follow up on this will see my article, which is about the consequences of contracting bank credit, and that will be up on this site, on the Gold Money site, later on today.
Okay.
I think that the character of China's exports will probably change. So they will continue to have an export dominance, but it's still going to be, I think, politically quite tricky. Now, having said that, what China is doing is it's moving itself away from that sort of property and export market. It would want that stable, I think. They're likely to increase their investment in trans-Asian communications. We're talking about railways, we're talking about roads, we're talking about telecommunications, we're talking about electricity, all that sort of stuff. And there's still an awful lot to do. And that, I think, is going to increasingly become a driver for the Chinese economy. So coming back to your basic point about China is the wild card, if you like, in Putin's plans, that I really do think is true. But having said that, when you look at the overall situation in China, it is probably not too much of a wild card. I can see them surviving the developing global economic conditions, perhaps better than most of us. So it's actually not a bad ally to have in that context for Putin.
Okay. Yeah, and it's very unusual that Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. agree on one thing, and that's their hawkishness towards China. And do the Chinese, I know they have a long memory that at the end of World War II, when Russia invaded them, after we had taken, the Allies had taken Berlin, and the area that Russia kept is rich in commodities. I think it's outer Mongolia or some region north of China. Wouldn't China like to have that back?
It's a difficult one to answer that. I think the interesting thing is that when it comes to that sort of nationalism, it's the sort of thing which is deployed.
They'd rather have Taiwan.
Well, exactly. It's deployed by politicians when they have a purpose to deploy it. Okay. And I don't think that, territory that was ceded to Russia at that, after the Second World War is necessarily ever really being on the agenda. I mean, you mentioned Taiwan. Now, that's a fascinating situation because Taiwan effectively, it controls the world's supply of computer chips.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is very important. Now, China would actually like that. I was sort of, with some friends the other day, I was hypothesizing that actually what Putin, if I was President Xi, this is what I would do. I'd bang the drum about nationalism, how we want to get Taiwan back into China and all the rest of it. And at a certain point in that, I would then turn around to the Taiwanese and say, now, come on, I think we can probably come to an arrangement. And that arrangement would essentially be around free trade, giving China, if you like, first dibs on those chips, which actually would suit her strategically in the broader sense, and also for the Taiwanese manufacturers of chips to invest in production facilities in China. That's what I would do if I was President Xi, but I'm not President Xi. So
Okay. All right.
But you can see how these things can play out in maybe slightly surprising ways.
Okay. So, I would say that you're most likely, we've had a nice bull market in the last 6 years in gold, and we've been consolidating for the last 2.5, 3 years. In my view, it's don't wait to buy gold, but buy gold and wait. Are you in that camp here?
Yeah, I'd go even further than you, Dale, in saying that gold, I mean, we're talking physical gold. We're not talking paper gold.
Right.
Physical gold is money. It has been officially, legally money since it was codified by Justinian back in the 6th century. It is still legally money. When you had J.P. Morgan himself giving evidence to Congress in 1912, he said, gold is money and all the rest is credit. Now, he wasn't stating an opinion, he was stating a legal fact. That is still the situation today. So gold is money. Now, the reason you hold money, you hoard money, is so that you have got liquidity, which you can spend at a future date. It is a mistake to look on physical gold as an investment. It is not an investment. An investment, by definition, is something you buy at one price today with a view to making a profit to sell it at another price in the future. Now, what we're talking about is holding gold against paper currencies, which are declining in purchasing power. That is not an investment. That is holding real, sound money.
That's a hedge.
Credit.
It's a monetary hedge.
It's stronger than that. It is money. The rest is credit. Okay. It's not a question of it being a hedge. It is money. It's as simple as that. And this is a point which I want to just make sure people really understand. Your government can turn around and ban ownership, as they did in 1933. Right. Doesn't change the fact that gold is money. Your central bank will refuse to let any gold, or the Treasury rather, will refuse to let any gold go out from underneath its control. Why? It is money. It's as simple as that. We don't know how much they've got. They say they've got 8,133.5 tons. I think that's the latest figure. I don't know if it's there. Who cares? But the fact is they're not going to let you as an individual have this in your possession. You have to go and get it elsewhere. And it's the same with every central bank. Why do they hold on to gold? Because they know that legally it is money. Nothing else is money. Silver is, yes. Copper is, yes. In coin form, we're talking in coin form. Okay. But they don't circulate anymore. I mean, not even copper circulates. I mean,
they took all the copper out of the pennies anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So,
feels like Rome to me, Alisdair.
We are talking money, not an investment. Big point to understand.
All right.
Now, having said that, you've got a chart here which looks interesting, and from a technical analysis point of view, I think I'd agree with you. It's about to shoot up northwards. How long it'll take, I don't know, but a little bit of patience maybe, and perhaps you'll get there. But actually, what you should be looking at is the chart the other way up of the dollar in gold, and see how that's going down and when that's going to break. Because actually what you're doing by buying gold is you're getting the hell out of paper currency. So that's the key thing. I mean,
do you like any fiat, Alisdair, like the commodity currencies, like the Canadian or the Aussie, in a fiat world, which is they're just credits? Are just like in the bond market, are there credits that are more credit worthy than others?
Well, exactly that. And I mean, you were showing a chart of the dollar index, the trade weighted, I guess. And, I mean, that doesn't mean to say the dollar's going up. It just means that other currencies are going down faster than the dollar. I mean, what's your rate of inflation? According to the CPI, it's something like 10%, nearly 10%. If you
Yeah.
talk to people like John Williams, he's saying it's closer to 17, 18%. I mean, you know, who
Well, we
cares?
don't have to worry about that because Paul's going to be just like Paul Volcker and take us
Really?
to 20% short-term rates and have the U.S. government default on its debt. So, yeah, you know, looking at the dollar, do you have any belief that the dollar's value is going to be challenged in the coming weeks, months, years because of Putin's strategy and what's happening with the world splitting into two?
I think, yes, I think that's definitely the case. Now, timing on these things is always very difficult. The other thing which you haven't mentioned, which I think is desperately important, is the parlous state of the global banking system.
Okay.
When you look at the level of balance sheet gearing in the Eurozone commercial banking network and also the Japanese major banks, we're talking about asset to capital ratios, equity, if you like, in excess of 20 times. I mean, this is extraordinary. We have never seen such highly geared banks in the global, the global systemically important banking network. This is going to lead to a collapse, given that the background is now one of rising interest rates rather than continually falling interest rates. It's a completely changed environment. And consequently, this changed environment means that every time bond yields notch up a little bit more, what it means is that all those zombie companies who have relied on virtually zero interest rates as the base position for their borrowing are going to go bust. And bankers know it. So what do you do as a banker? Well, you deleverage your balance sheet. I mean, you've got to do that as quickly as possible.
Are they? And they're not yet, are they?
Well, they are beginning to do it. I mean, this is reflected, if you like, in the slowdown that you're seeing in the growth of broad money,
okay,
which is almost
today.
Yeah, which is almost entirely bank credit. It doesn't actually capture the situation properly, but bear in mind something that Jamie Dimon said at a banking conference in New York. I think it was either the very end of June or the beginning of July. He said, 2 weeks ago, I described the economy as being in a storm. I'm upgrading that to it is now in a hurricane. Now, that was a very clear signal from the world's most senior, most powerful commercial banker that he is going to be contracting his balance sheet. Now, his chief economist rode back on that, because just imagine the reaction of the Fed when they heard this. I mean, shock, horror. We can't have Jamie Dimon saying this. So the chief economist rode back on his comments, but it was quite clear, if you understood what the bank credit position is and where we are in that cycle, this is the clearest warning of a turn down in bank credit that we have had probably in history. This is very important. Again. Yeah.
Should we be concerned about bail-ins? Depositors be concerned?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is yes, because if they try and do that, I mean, it would be a most stupid thing you can imagine. The basic function of a central bank when you get a banking crisis is to protect the depositors in the banks. Now, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but that's the actual role that central banks have today. If they try and attempt bail-ins, then they will not achieve that. All they will do is they will hasten the flight out of bonds in particular, and particularly the larger deposits will leave banks which are deemed to be risky and will go elsewhere. And this is something which you do not want to trigger by your actions. I mean, the answer is that if, let us say, a major bank in the Eurozone fails, the first thing that all the central banks must do is agree that they will take over any bank which risks failing. Don't make the mistake that they made over Lehman, because the consequences of not rescuing Lehman were absolutely frightening. I mean, it meant the Fed had to write an open check. I mean, it was as simple as that.
Yeah, live through it. And really informative interview, Alisdair. I mean, really, I tell people to keep an open mind, and that'll keep their account open. So, seeing this side of what's behind this move by Russia and what the aims and goals are and what position that leaves us in, I think is a wake-up call. So thank you for being a watchman for us and for your writings opening our eyes to things we don't hear or see.
That's very much my pleasure, Dale.
It was great meeting you. Let's have a conversation down the road and see what the inner circle is doing and accomplishing. Really appreciate your giving spirit for sharing your knowledge with us. I recommend people go to your website and read the report for themselves. It's goldmoney.com. And Alisdair, it was great to meet you. And thanks for your time. Great discussion.
Very much my pleasure, Dale. Thank you.
Okay. Have a great weekend. Everyone, hope you enjoyed Alisdair, and good luck in the markets. And I'll see everyone or talk to everyone or chat with everyone after Paul comes down from the mountain at Jackson Hole and gives us his hallowed words. Thank you again, Alisdair.
My pleasure.
All right, buddy. That's a wrap, everyone.